In a small town in Mexico, there lived a wealthy family. Mrs. Alejandra, her husband Pablo, and their beloved son, Pedro. Alejandra deeply loved her family, especially her son, who was now old enough to marry. However, she always said that no woman was special enough for him. Pedro had brought several girlfriends home, but Alejandra always found a way to scare them off or drive them away from the house. "If you keep this up, one day your son is going to hate you," Pablo would tell his wife, and out of anger, something bad could happen. Alejandra would laugh dismissively. "My beautiful son would never hurt me," she would reply. "He knows that I only want what's best for him. These women today don't even come close to his level. I'd rather see him single than married to someone not up to our social standards. He needs to find a good, beautiful, and diligent woman just like me, his mother." Her husband just sighed and stayed quiet in disbelief. As time went by, Pedro even stopped bringing his friends over, especially female friends, or even the ones he saw as potential girlfriends, out of fear of his mother's behavior. He resigned himself to being alone for the rest of his life. It was Holy Week, a holiday celebrated in his town, and Pedro decided to go to the town dance with his friends. There, he met the most beautiful woman he had ever seen in his life. He asked his friends about her, but no one knew much. Her name was Lupita, and she was an orphan, living alone with her grandmother in a very poor house on the poorest side of town. The young man didn't care, and after a few drinks, he mustered the courage to invite her to dance. They danced all night, and the two fell in love. As time passed, they grew closer. However, Pedro had his suspicions. Whenever he tried to visit Lupita at her grandmother's house, she would make up some excuse and always leave alone. Pedro tried to follow her, but she would always give him the runaround. He would get lost and have to return home. "It's like she's hiding something," Pedro would say. But a few days later, Lupita would come looking for Pedro and they would go out as if nothing happened. Pedro, however, was determined to find out where she lived and finally one night managed to follow her home. She indeed lived in the poorest house in town. That is what she was trying to hide, thought Pedro. But he did not care how poor she was. He loved her despite it all. Lupita looked back and yelled, "I knew you were following me the whole time. I let you find me. I really like you, maybe even love you. I wanted you to know about my social standing. I don't want you to love me without knowing how I live. It is a small house, a little old, maybe shabby, but my grandmother raised me here with nothing but love. Would you like to meet her?" Pedro was taken by hearing that and said, "Yes, I would love to meet my future mother-grandmother-in-law." Lupita, with tears in her eyes, hugged him, and they went inside. He met her grandmother, and she quickly took a liking to him, and made him promise he would take care of Lupita. She said, "I can tell you are meant to be, and seeing this I know can finally die in peace." Pedro decided not to introduce Lupita to his mother, as he was afraid she would run her off as she did with every other woman he had brought home. This girl was different. This was the girl who had won his heart. He would not risk his mother trying to scare her away. With the help of his father, and now with Lupita's grandmother's permission and blessing, they secretly married. The whole town knew, except for his mother. As they came out of the church, Alejandra was waiting outside all dressed in black. She maintained a twisted, almost crazed smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "So my son has chosen to marry a simple peasant," she said in a calm, almost whispering tone. "I hope you can bear the consequences of your decision, Pedro." Without another word, Alejandra stood still, looking at the happy couple with anger and sheer frustration in her eyes, and for a moment looked like she was going to say something else, but she walked away, leaving an air of unease in her wake. The celebration continued, but Pedro felt a knot in his stomach. Something wasn't right. You should try and go after her, Pedro, said Lupita. Pedro hurried to try and persuade her mother to join in the festivities and try and get her to change her mind, but she was gone. She turned a corner and vanished out of sight. Pedro looked around and saw nothing but a single long black feather on the ground right next to where the mom had turned. He paid no mind and went back to joining his new bride and the rest of his friends and family to continue his wedding celebration. Months passed and Pedro lived happily with his wife. Pedro's mother had cut all ties with him, and that included any financial help or access to his family's bank accounts. Pedro moved in with Lupita and her grandmother. They lived a simple, poor life, but they were happy. Pedro's father, seeing his son so destitute, fought with his wife constantly. You cannot cut him off. He's our only son and is entitled to our fortune. You cannot have him live like that, Alejandra would yell at the top of her lungs. He chose that good-for-nothing gold-digger tramp over his own mother. He will get nothing until he comes on his knees, begging for my forgiveness. He will not see a single cent, then he will crawl back. You will see Pablo had finally had enough. He told his wife he was going to go live with his son and new wife and file for a divorce. He could not stand another day with such a wretched vulture of a woman. Before he could walk away, his wife yelled and screamed. A horrible sound escaped her lungs and Pablo's eyes turned back inside his head and he died instantly. Alejandra called the police and a report was made. A heart attack was labeled as the cause. Alejandra met with Pedro at the hospital and said to him, "Your father died of a broken heart. He could not bear seeing you live as a poor peasant. His weak heart could not take it. This is all your fault. Come back to me, my son. The house, the money, it's all yours. Just leave that tramp and come back to your dear mother," Alejandra pleaded. Pedro quietly hugged her and said, "I love you, Mom, but my wife needs me at home," and left her there. While he was walking out, he saw the coroners and police that brought the father to the hospital all huddled up and talking in a low whisper. His father was a healthy man, so Pedro was suspicious about what actually happened. He approached them and asked what really caused his father's death. They all stood silent. The police had to leave since they had gotten another call, said their condolences to Pedro, and left. The coroner looked at him and said it was a heart attack, like was said in the report. But Pedro could sense something was off. There was something he was not saying, and so Pedro pleaded, "Please tell me what happened." He looked at him and said, "It is as if he died of fright. His heart was so exacerbated, as if he had seen the devil himself," said the coroner, then continued saying that during the examination, his eyes had rolled all the way back into his head, as if trying to avoid the sight of what he had witnessed moments before his death. Pedro, concerned and stunned, thanked him and went home to his wife. They mourned his father's passing but lived on. A few weeks had passed and Pedro received a letter of a will his father had left him where it stated that he would obtain money in a house his father had secretly purchased for his wife and his new family. Pedro, taken aback with tears, told his wife and now grandmother the great news. They planned on visiting the house and seeing if it was move-in ready. The grandmother decided to stay so that she could get started on packing all the things they would be taking to their new home. Lupita and Pedro arrived at the house where the agent was waiting, keys in hand. The agent showed them the house. It was large and fully furnished. It had a beautiful large family couch with an imported Egyptian rug, a fully stocked kitchen with pots and pans at the ready, fine china plates, and silver cutlery. 4 bedrooms, 2 baths, large covered backyard. Everything about it was perfect. Grandma would love this place. They both thought, and after everything that has happened, it will be great. They stayed for a while, talking to the agent and getting the house ready. Meanwhile, back at the old shabby house, Lupita's grandmother was finally done packing everything and was sitting down by the TV, resting her old but still strong bones. She sipped some coffee and watched her favorite show. She hears a knock on the back window. She goes to investigate. Then, all of a sudden, as she opens the large glass window, a dark shadow enters the room. A horrid twisted bird was now inside the house with her. The creature surveyed the house in disgust and then turned to the old woman. The grandmother tried to scream, but no words would come out. She was paralyzed with fear. All she could do was stare as it approached her slowly. Then the creature let out a horrific screech. The poor old woman could not bear the sound. She covered her ears, but could not shut her eyes or look away. The sight of the grotesque entity left her still, just staring until her old heart could take no more, and in the blink of an eye she lay dead. The creature left the way it came, in leaving nothing but a few feathers on the old woman's dead body. Pedro and Lupita come back, ready to get everything and move into their new home. They open the door and see the grandmother on the floor, dead. They call the police immediately and wait for them to arrive. Once more they are told that the cause of death was a heart attack due to her old age. Pedro becomes even more suspicious after hearing this, and runs down to the coroner's office to speak with him. To his surprise, the coroner says, "It was just like your father's death. It was as if she died of fright, scared to death." Pedro decides not to tell Lupita what the coroner said and tries to move forward and live happily with his wife. They mourn for some time and finally decide to move into the new house. They will put the past behind them and finally have their happily ever after. Or so they thought. After the couple fully moved into the new house, Pedro was able to find a job that was closer to home and paid better, but had a harder workload. He was ready to start his new job, and Lupita was going to stay at home and take care of the house. They were both relieved to start saving up money and building a new and better future together. On the first day of his new job, Pedro gets up to go to work and takes the lunch Lupita made for him. He kisses her goodbye, saying how excited he is to come home to his new wife. She says you will be even more excited when you come home to a delicious dinner. Lupita goes back to sleep and wakes up 2 hours later, ready to clean the house and prepares dinner. While the pots are boiling and the meat is marinating, she opens a window to air out the freshly mopped house. She then goes to take a shower and get ready for Pedro when he comes home. While in the shower, she hears a loud crashing noise and a horrible screech. She stays in the shower stunned with fear. She continues to hear banging, clashing, and breaking noises all around the house. She finally builds the courage to check what the commotion is. Armed with a towel around her body and a broom, she goes to check. When she finally goes to the kitchen, she is in disbelief at what she finds. The pots and pans that were cooking and the meat that was marinating were all over the floor. There was a huge mess around the entire house. She thought there must have been a bad wind that came in through the window that did this. She had a perfectly spotless house, and now it was completely ruined. She tried to clean up the best she could, but there was only so much she could do. It was still too much of a mess to clean up. As she starts to catch her breath, she hears someone at the door. It was Pedro. She tried her best to explain what had happened, but she didn't know herself or how to explain it. Pedro sighed and said, "It's fine, I just had a hard day at work. Did you at least make dinner?" She said, "I did have dinner ready. Well, I tried to, but..." She tried to explain once more how the pots and pans that were being used to prepare dinner were tossed on the floor by something. Maybe a gust of wind came in through the open window and left everything a huge mess. Pedro just sighed, telling her he would go take a shower. He tried to be understanding, but he was exhausted and slightly angry. He told her, "Just make me anything you can." Lupita rushed to the fridge, but all she finds are 2 slices of frozen cake from their wedding, a cold boiled potato, and a moldy slab of cheese. After a while, Pedro comes in to see what's on the table. He kisses her and says, "Let's eat out tonight." The next day, Pedro leaves without waking up Lupita, and notices the house is still a mess, and hopes that will change by the time he comes back home from work. Lupita wakes up a while later and gets straight to cleaning. She gets the house spotless, The floors are so clean you could eat of them. Not that you would want to, she thought to herself, but you could. She checks her fridge and notices there is nothing but the cold potato, moldy cheese, and the wedding cake. So she decides to go grocery shopping. She leaves an extra key under the mat for Pedro, in case he comes home early. However, unbeknownst to her, something had been watching her, and had been for a long time now. She gets an eerie feeling that starts in her shoulders and down to her stomach. She shakes it off, assuming it's nothing, and goes on her way. She buys groceries and everything she needs to make a delicious dinner. Checking the time, she sees that she doesn't have time tonight to make anything for dinner before Pedro gets home. So she goes to his favorite Chinese food spot, one of the only ones in their town. Lupita gets the food and starts her way back home and sees Pedro's car in the driveway. She is thinking to herself, he is going to love how clean the house is, and going to be even more happy that I brought his favorite Chinese food. She enters the house and notices Pedro looking at it stunned, staring at the house in disbelief. She started to smile and was about to ask if he liked how the house was left, until she took a look around and found out it was an utter mess once more. Pedro assumes that she did not have time to clean the house and sighs, and asks if she at least made dinner. She tries to explain again how she cleaned everything spotless and came back from the markets to this huge mess. Something must have happened. I don't understand how, but she stutters, trying to make dinner, but before she can finish explaining to Pedro, he looks down with a cold tone and says, "It's okay. You don't have to explain why you didn't clean the house, and ask one more. Did you at least make dinner? I had a long day, and I am so hungry," she says in a solemn but hopeful tone. "No, but I got groceries for tomorrow, and I brought your favorite, Chinese." Pedro looks at her and sighs. "But Chinese is your favorite." Pedro adds, "Yes, but you forgot to pack me lunch this morning." I tried packing myself something, but there was only a cold potato, moldy cheese, and 2 slices of a very old wedding cake. So I got Chinese food at work during my lunch. Lupita with a sad voice says, "Oh, I am so sorry. I can try to make you something quickly." Pedro says, "It's okay. I can eat Chinese food again. It is my favorite after all, I guess. Please at least let's empty the fridge. It's starting to smell." "Yes, of course. Let's eat, and I will get to that right now." After they eat, Pedro goes off for a shower, and Lupita starts to clean the house, but still cannot finish because it is already late and she is sleepy herself. She prepares him lunch for work tomorrow and decides to clean the rest in the morning and goes to bed. The next day Pedro wakes up before Lupita and sees a beautiful lunch waiting for him with a note apologizing. He goes to work happy with his lunch. Lupita wakes up soon after and cleans the entire house again, makes dinner, stays in the kitchen the entire time, closes all the windows, locks all of the doors, and makes sure nothing will go wrong this time. A few minutes before Pedro gets home, she begins plating a delicious dinner she spent hours making. Afterward, she goes to the bedroom to change into some fresh clothes, a cute dress to greet him. As she finishes dressing, she hears a loud crashing noise. But this time, she is ready. She sprints into the kitchen, ready. She is taken aback at the sight of a horrifying, twisted black vulture. With beady red eyes, large black feathers, a long distorted beak, and huge sharp talons. It had broken through the window. Glass was all over the floor, and it catapulted the plated dinner to the floor as it crashed into the house. It flew up to the stove and brought down some pans. It grabbed a pot full of food with its talons and dragged it all over the living room floor and onto the couch, making a complete mess and ruining the couch and the rug. Lupita screamed in disbelief. The bird then launched at her. Pedro's car can be heard pulling into the driveway. As soon as the vulture hears this, it takes off back out through the broken window. Pedro opens the door to the house and is greeted by nothing but destruction. The living room is destroyed. Broken plates are all over the house. Food is covering almost every inch of the living room, and there is shattered glass everywhere. Furiously, he yells for his wife. As soon as he sees her, he screams, "I can't do this. I work my ass off to provide a happy life. I married you against my mother's approval. I did not care about your past or social standing. I married you for love, and in return, this is how you returned my love. You destroyed the house my father gave me. What could you possibly have to say for yourself?" Lupita stumbles over her words, through tears and sobbing, and tells him the whole incident of how a giant vulture broke in through the window and made this mess, then tried to attack her, and that as soon as he pulled into the driveway, it flew out the window. Pedro yells, even more furious, "And you still have the audacity to lie to my face and make up stories. I can't do this anymore." Lupita, heartbroken, runs to the bedroom, sobbing uncontrollably. Pedro takes a breath, sitting on the kitchen table since the living room is all but destroyed, couch included, and waits for his anger to subside. He gets up to apologize, but as he stands, he is distracted by something on the floor. He sees bird prints all over the kitchen. It must have made them while walking on what was made for dinner. He follows the prints to where the window was shattered and notices blood dripping on the window, and one single black bird feather. His wife was right, he thought. She was telling the truth after all. He goes to apologize and asks her to tell him the story of what happened. She explains how each day since they have lived here, she has been cleaning and cooking, and that something has been coming and ruining it. She explains how this time she made sure she was there to catch whatever it was, but she still could not stop it. She begged him to believe her, and continued sobbing, "Please believe me, I love you, and I would not lie about this. Please believe me." He pulled out the feather and told her that he believed her. So they make a plan to catch the thing. The next day, Pedro wakes up at the same time and leaves for work. Lupita woke up shortly after, prepared another grand dinner, and even baked a giant cake. She patched the broken window and had a new couch and rug delivered. She's lucky they were able to deliver the new couch and rug and take away the old ones. Lupita checks the time and sees that she still has a few hours before Pedro gets home, so she takes a nap. Meanwhile, outside a dark shadow waits, watching the house and her every move. It watched her patch the broken window. It watched the movers come and go, and it watched her finish cooking dinner and decorate the cake. Finally, she was alone. Fearing that another broken window would startle Lupita from her nap, it decided to use the key under the mat to open the door and crept in quietly. After closing the door, it changed back. It didn't need its hands for what it was about to do. Its wings and talons would suffice. However, Lupita and Pedro had a plan for this. Pedro would drive to work, as he did every morning, but this time he would leave his car there and walk back home through the back streets that are covered by thick trees and bushes, making it almost impossible to be seen. He would avoid using the front door, but instead come in through the back bedroom window, where Lupita would be waiting, and together they would catch the bird that has been destroying their beautiful home. Pedro was too excited to wait for work to end, so he decided to walk home early. A little deviation from the plan won't hurt, he thought, and continued according to plan. He would not use the front door, but go in through the back window of the house as planned. Lupita was there waiting in the bedroom for him. She was in bed waiting when she heard a soft whisper, "Lupita, it's me, Pedro." Taken by surprise, she quietly helped him in the room. Pedro asks, "Anything?" Lupita says, "I heard something unlocking the door. I was waiting for you so we can go investigate." But before they get up to open the bedroom door, it starts. A loud screech trembles throughout the house, and a macabre laughter soon follows. Pots and pans are heard crashing to the floor, plates shattering. They both run to the kitchen and Pedro finally sees the giant pitch-black vulture with its beady red eyes. Its dirty feet were on top of the cake, destroying it with its talons, almost as if it were dancing content with what it was doing. As soon as the bird turned and saw Pedro, it tried to flee almost as if it were embarrassed of being seen by Pedro. The vulture aimed for the patched-up window, but before it could make it, Lupita angrily stood in front of the window, not allowing it to escape. The bird was taken by surprise, and then became infuriated at the sight of Lupita, and it started to lunge talons poised to strike. Lupita closed her eyes and covered her face, expecting the worst. Pedro, seeing this in a flash, grabs a large metal pan from the stove and starts bludgeoning the bird. Every hit got stronger as the memory of him screaming at his wife and bringing her to tears came back to him. Then, all of a sudden, the bird makes a bone-chilling squeal, almost human-like, and gasping for air, it speaks. "Pedro, please stop," it says, with a raspy low voice on the brink of death. Pedro, still in fury, does not hear and does not stop. Then, another scream was heard. This time Pedro stopped and looked straight at his wife. Lupita was the one who made that second scream, and with utter shock and paralyzing fear, tried to speak, but no words could escape her mouth. Pedro looks at her and says, "What? What is it? Are you okay? Are you injured?" With her last ounce of strength, Lupita mumbles, "Please, stop your killing her, killing your mother." Pedro, taken aback by the words his wife had spoken, his rage now dissipated like a blown-out candle. He hurls the blood-covered pan and slowly looks down at the floor, seeing nothing but feathers, a pool of blood, and the fragile, lifeless body of a woman. He tries to blink to make the bird reappear. He keeps blinking in hopes of seeing a dead bird on the ground, but it was his mother's corpse instead. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories.